The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Project Nerd as a whole. Welcome to Project Nerd's Diving Deep. You came here this week to this episode, our second one in February, expecting to hear us finish our thoughts on social media. I'd promised themed months, a temporary departure from politics, but then last week happened. The events of February 8th through February 13th. The display of corruption and bias politics in Washington, D.C. The end result of a trial, a mock trial, an impeachment trial. It was acquittal. The end result of what happened with the Senate was no surprise. We all knew there wasn't a chance that 17 Republican senators would break away from Trump and MAGA. We all knew that as soon as the trial wrapped, the voices of the conservative right would state that this acquittal means innocence. And we all knew he, Trump himself, would immediately step back into the spotlight, condemning those that actually sought to uphold the law as traitors against him. That's why we're not talking social media, and instead, in this episode of Diving Deep, we're once again diving deep into politics. We're once again getting caught up in what is playing out in Washington. Today, I'm going to share with you what went down during this so-called impeachment trial, detailing very clearly why it was an absolute disgusting display of loyalty and corruption. And we're going to also talk about why that behavior and the acquittal itself sets a very dangerous precedent for what could happen in the future, and also how it impacts the Republican Party in politics going forward.
I could let them know about the sorrow and the happiness that the future has in store for them. Maybe they could learn from it.
Let's dive deep.
Let's dive right in.
We're gonna dive deep into this.
Let's deep dive into this.
This is Diving Deep.
This is Diving Deep.
This is Diving Deep.
As we get started, I want to make this very clear. The events that have unfolded over the past few months, especially the last few weeks, the events that I'm about to read to you are all facts of what actually took place. These actions from Trump, from rioters, Congress, aren't hearsay. They aren't opinions. They're not fake news. This is what happened. This trial was a clear and transparent display of corruption by many, and it started long before last week. On election night, when Trump and his allies began, without a single shred of evidence, feeding the MAGA machine lies about the election being stolen, a large portion of voters that had already voted for such a corrupt individual began to question everything. Standing behind that claim, Trump's aides helped fund and organize a rally in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. The paper trail very clearly showing it wasn't the grassroots movement that so many Republicans want you to believe it to be. And on that same day, while Congress was holding a joint session, most with the intent to uphold their role in defending our Constitution and election laws, Donald Trump knowingly and willingly ignited a fire under a group of terrorists that led to an attack on our country's capital and the death of 5 people. Shortly after, Mitch McConnell, with nearly all the Republican senators standing behind him, worked a deal with Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to hold off the Senate's impeachment trial until after Biden's inauguration, therefore ensuring the trial wouldn't happen while Trump was still in office. Immediately after inauguration took place, MAGA loyalists pretending to be representatives of the people, meaning Republican congressmen and senators, started running to the streets and airwaves to declare an impeachment trial of a president that is no longer holding office as an unconstitutional act. And before January was out, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, a loud supporter of Trump since the beginning, staged a Senate vote to declare the impeachment trial unconstitutional, knowing it would put Republicans on the spot while MAGA cultists loudly were calling for the heads and replacement of anybody who betrayed their orange god. No matter, the vote upheld the trial as constitutional. Then, in early February, both Democrat and Republican senators who were targeted victims of the attack on the Capitol were sworn in as a jury for that impeachment trial. Yes, those directly involved in the incident were chosen to hear and rule on the case. And then after that, the trial started. And in the week of the impeachment trial, the Senate voted again that the trial was indeed within the laws of this country and constitutional. As the impeachment trial started further, more than 41 Republican senators were reported as mockingly rolling their eyes, turning their heads and even, quote, snickering and doodling during presentation of evidence. Senators from both sides of the aisles were recorded laughing at Trump's lawyer, Mike Vanderveen, during a debate on presenting witnesses. And that same lawyer even had to ask if they were under oath. And when you thought that might be enough to make this an unlawful circus, the display of disgrace continued. Idaho Senator Jim Risch, who voted to acquit Trump, purposely and publicly missed part of the trial. Then on Thursday evening of the week of the trial, Republican senators and Trump loyalists Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, and Mike Lee, while serving as members of the jury hearing to convict Trump, met with Donald Trump's defense team in private. And finally, ahead of the vote, McConnell, the GOP Senate leader who has said Trump is guilty, sent a letter to the other Republican senators to let them know he was voting to acquit, a letter that would obviously influence dozens of senators. Then the vote finally happened, to little news or surprise, 57 to 43, 10 shy of the needed votes to convict. Many Republican senators were making the argument that a vote to convict was unconstitutional, although the decision to declare the trial as constitutional had already been voted on and approved twice. The list of events I just read to you are an absolute mockery of our legal system. They are a disgrace to the laws in place to conduct a fair and accurate trial. Those events are a clear and public display of corruption. Tell me, where else in this country would those actions not lead to a retrial with a new, unbiased jury? The answer I'm looking for is nowhere. Nowhere else, plain and simple. It wasn't a trick question. Not for anybody, no matter what way you vote. Before I go much further, I want you to understand, as stated in episodes before, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. But watching the events of the last 4 years turn the GOP into a disgusting display of loyalty for just one man, one disgusting, sexist, racist, rapey, pathetic excuse of a man, it makes me furious at the Republican Party and the more than 70 million Americans that voted for Trump in 2020. And now, watching this unfold with the usual suspects, McConnell, Cruz, Graham, Hawley, Rubio, Rand, and Lee being right in the middle of it, I'm reminded that the Republican Party now is forever married to Donald Trump, for worse and for worse. And I'm also reminded that the continued excuses, those that give to support those jokers, are not the truth. Those voters want these corrupt and hateful individuals in power for very many reasons. The events of January 6th were an act of terror. The attack was a staged coup. It was an insurrection empowered directly by Donald Trump and his allies, not just through the speech in which he carefully directed the people to riot, but also through months of lies and well-plotted messaging. Acquittal here does not mean innocence. The evidence was presented to everybody. It's right there. The video, the audio, the testimony, the facts. They all show Trump knowingly worked a crowd in hopes they would overthrow the very laws he was appointed to defend. It happened. And yes, it's done. And as I said, it's not a surprise. We all knew acquittal was always coming after this trial. Just as much as we all know, what happened because of this trial is very much working in Donald Trump and MAGA's favor. This all played out great for Trump. Trump, who actually for once listened to his advisors and aides, remaining quiet and in the background until the trial was done. And within minutes of being acquitted, that same Trump who stepped back into the spotlight with his untouchable shit-eating grin and his bigotry demeanor, declaring his intent to remain a major player in the Republican machine. Trump's claim that this was, quote, a sad commentary on our times is already the war cry of those that support his hate and bigotry, while it echoes through the Republican ranks right down to those voters who claim they only vote for Trump because he's what their party gave them. More and more conspirators and hate groups are currently rising up and taking notice. The dangerous precedent has been set. In less than 2 months, the group that tried to overthrow our government in order to illegally instill a tyrannical dictator based on lies and hate has been shown that their actions, both then and now in the future, will go largely unpunished, meaning acts of terror like what happened on January 6th will indeed happen again. and again and again and again until one of those acts succeed, until our government is indeed overthrown. What happened on January 6th made me angry. Oh, did it make me livid. But what just happened? The metaphorical middle finger nearly 4 Republican senators just gave the people of this country makes me equally angry. The acquittal, and more importantly, the fact the nation saw the Republican senators openly act above the law without consequence, reminds many, especially white nationalists, that the laws of this nation are not the same for all, that not everyone here is treated equally. All of this just once again establishes a validity and platform to groups that stand on hate, racism, sexism, homophobia, and terror. And those platforms are held up by Republican voters claiming that they aren't any of those things. This is yet another very dangerous precedent being set. And all of this, is far from over. It seemed like it might have been. It seemed like Trump, by screwing up so horribly in the end, was actually going to make America great again, just in a way he didn't intend. But he didn't. Republicans didn't. Trump, no, the whole Republican Party and voters aren't making America great again. In fact, they're making it hate again. The cream of hate had risen to the top of the Republican coffee, and it looked like it was going to be scraped off the top and tossed aside. But the spoon of corruption, led by Cruz, Hawley, Graham, and definitely McConnell, stirred those terrible and disgusting traits right deep back into the party itself. As stated, Trump and the Republican Party are now forever intertwined. Just when it looked like the MAGA stronghold over the Republican Party might slowly disappear, this past 6 weeks tightened that grip more than ever before, as it looked like the Republican Party was at a point to go in a direction that would rid itself of much of this ugly conspiracy, hate, and lies it had recently embraced. That MAGA stronghold reared its head and ensured that those traits would in fact define the party for some time to come. And what looked like a forming fracture in the GOP, one that would benefit Democrats, democracy, and this country, is just a faded wish, as Trump will now use this win to put his allies and his faithful followers in every possible position of power he can, even if he himself doesn't run for office again. That's right. What's ahead for the Republican Party is Trump. And a lot of Trump. It is Trump disguised as Graham. It is Trump disguised as Cruz. It will definitely be Trump disguised as many other disgraceful and spineless loyalists. But I assure you, it's Trump. And the Republican voters? They'll vote for him. The fearful cry of the socialist left taking power and destroying this country will rally so many of those sheep. Those voters will put any and all openly racist, sexist, and hateful bigots in power with the defense that they voted for the lesser of two evils, and even the claim that they are doing what's right by God. The answers, the topics I promised to cover at the beginning of this episode of what was ahead for the Republican Party in politics is exactly all of that. It's Trump, it's lies, it's conspiracies, it's corruption, and it's hate. And it's all out in the open because they don't even have to hide it anymore. The what we call old school corruption we knew from politicians in DC, that corruption hidden and disguised, that corruption that benefited the rich of all kind, is a thing of the past. Now, Republican senators are openly flaunting the fact that they don't have to do what is right by this country because they can do whatever they want and never lose a vote. That, my friends, is privilege. That, my friends, is also disgusting. Politics is no longer just politics. Politics used to be a Republican voter and Democrat voter arguing over increases in taxes. Politics used to be a conservative and liberal each voting down party lines because of their views on wanting stronger or weaker government assistance. Politics used to be something you'd avoid at the dinner table with your family on Thanksgiving. Politics shouldn't be defending Trump and his allies stating, without an ounce of evidence, that an election was stolen. Politics shouldn't be voting for the candidate your party gave you after that person openly defends white nationalists and racism. Politics shouldn't be allowing a man with more than 24 charges of sexual misconduct and rape to become the leader of the free world. And politics shouldn't be watching the person you voted for incite an act of terror, then stating he can't be held accountable because he's no longer in office. Again, it shouldn't be, because all signs point to that being exactly what it is. And because it's all of that, politics is also causing more of a divide than ever before. What we saw become acceptable again during Trump's administration, racism, sexism, homophobia being openly praised and admired, just got a stamp of approval from the United States of America as a whole. Those terrible things that shouldn't be a part of politics, let alone shouldn't exist, are now what the American voter either votes in favor of or against. And they do so knowingly, no matter how much they claim ignorance or God's will. The impeachment trial, or more accurately, the display of behavior throughout it, has ensured all of that. I know this is quick and we're getting close to a wrap, but before we close, I want you to remember what January 6th did. The attempted coup led to the death of 5 people, including a police officer. The act of terror incited by Trump showed other hate groups and even other countries how easily our Capitol could be breached. It allowed terrorists that stormed the Capitol get within 20 yards of Pence's nuclear football. That's the case that carries nuclear missile codes, war protocols, and other top secret information. And it did all of that without anybody who helped orchestrate or lead it see any disciplinary act or accountability. It also did so much more. But after listing just those horrendous things, do we need to go further down the rabbit hole of how bad it was? And even with all of that, the Senate-held impeachment trial was never taken seriously by the majority of Republican senators, by the majority of Republican voters. Meaning, those that voted for Trump turned their heads or supported this hate. Those that voted for Ted Cruz encouraged this act of terrorism. Those that reelected Lindsey Graham incited a riot. Those that put Josh Hawley in office helped put the weapons in white nationalists' hands. And those that let Mitch McConnell remain in D.C. have ensured Republican politicians can act outside of the law going forward. I'm going to ask you, the Republican voter, for a huge favor. I know you're likely not even here anymore. If you're my family, you're ready to call me upset because you, for some reason, blame me for you feeling attacked by me calling this out. If you're not my family and are still listening, you likely don't stand for it or never voted for it in the first place. But let's pretend some of you that voted for Trump, Cruz, Hawley, McConnell, Graham, and all those others that just laughed in our faces with no fear are indeed still here and still listening. I need to ask you, is this what you really stand for? Is this what you really want? Have you really been sold the lie of socialism so well that you indeed are okay with your party's display of loyalty to one man over a country? That you're fine with choosing candidates pushing hate and lies to avoid what? Higher taxes? Or that you'll stand behind a Republican Party becoming a more and more corrupt administration than it was before, all because 40 years ago you were told it was the Christian Party? If you don't stand for what is happening, are you willing to break the ranks? Are you strong enough to break from Trump and his mindless minions? Based on what I've seen as of late, I fear I already know the answer. Because the reason we knew a conviction wouldn't happen is due to the fact that the hate and bigotry displayed by the Republican politicians in D.C. are in fact a reflection of their voters. They won't stand against it because they want what is happening to happen. The truth is, we need those 80-some million Americans that yelled no to Trump and this hate in November to stand up. We need that number to somehow become 300 million Americans. We need this entire country to start acting like all have a chance at the American dream, a dream that's only achievable when those who look differently than you, love differently than you, and worship differently than you have the same opportunities you do. Basically, we need to trump hate, not to trump America like we have for the past 4 years and what it looks like we're going to do for the next many years to come. That's our show. Thank you again for listening to Diving Deep on Project Nerd. I know this was a short episode, but it was written, reviewed, and fact-checked in a very short time, as what happened just happened. And I know I promised our show would veer away from the politics during 2021 with many other topics on the agenda. But with that another disgraceful act in the political sphere, being quiet just isn't an option. And this might make me sound like a broken record, but I'm going to have to say it again. When acts of terror like this are tolerated, when an openly racist and hateful person can become the president in the 21st century, when lies and harmful conspiracies can be accepted as facts by millions, when people who are a different race or a different religion are being mowed down in the streets, it's time to speak up. It's time to stand up. It's time to say enough. It's, as I said, time for that 85 million to become 300 million. There are no lanes when we talk about humanity, when we talk about rights, when we talk about extinguishing hate. It's time to trump that hate.
Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Diving deep is, well, diving deep in 2021. Social media, defining socialism, school loans, the movie industry, comic conventions, and yes, more politics are all on the agenda this year. Stay tuned every other Monday for more Diving Deep. And for other exciting and awesome Project Nerd podcasts, head over to projectnerd.com/podcast to find over a dozen active series across multiple topics and genres. That's project-nerd.com/podcasts. Goodbye, everyone.